Hi, in this lesson we're going to take a look at how to animate this pendulum swinging back and forth. This is a pretty straightforward FK rig. That just means that we're going to be selecting a control and directly rotating it with our rotate tool. And the first thing I do before I set any keys and animate is to just check my preferences. So I'm going to go down here to the lower right where this little icon, which to me looks like a guy running away from a saw. I'm going to click on that. And let's look at the playback to start. So the playback speed is set to play every frame. That just means it's not going to skip any frames to try to keep up with the frame rate. If you have a fast computer, I don't think you need to worry about it. I would leave it at play every frame. But if timing is critical, you can set it to be whatever your frame rate is here. Let's leave it at that. And then the max playback speed, I'm going to be animating at 24 frames per second. So that's correct. Up here you can see the frame rate is 24. So that's good. It's also set to loop continuously, which is going to be helpful in this case because we're going to swing this pendulum back and forth. And then the other thing that I check is in the animation settings. I want to set the default in and out tangent to linear in this case because I want to demonstrate a couple things regarding converting tangents on keyframes in the graph editor. So let's start off with linear tangents, and you'll see what that means in a second. Click Save. And then the next thing, let's make sure we're in the animation menu set. That just changes the options here on the top. And we should be good to go. Let me actually, over here on the right, there's another way to switch to your animation menu set. You can go down to the Workspace, the animation workspace, and that switches up the whole interface, and it opens up the graph editor along the bottom. If it's taking up too much room, you can click on the graph editor text here and just collapse it. I don't need to see my attribute editor either, so I'm going to close that with Control A. Or just click on attribute editor. All right, so let's start. We've got our playback head down here on the timeline at 0, which is fine. That's a good place to start. And what I'll do first is just select these two controllers by holding Shift to select both of them and press the S key. Now, when you press the S key, it sets a key for all of the keyable attributes. I'm not actually going to be keying or animating the translate or the scale or the visibility. So in this case, I'm actually going to undo that. And instead, here's a nice shortcut to memorize. If you're keying just the rotations, press Shift E, and that will only key the rotation values. And again, that's all we need in this instance. If I wanted to keyframe the translate, it would be Shift W, and scale would be Shift R, but I don't need those. I just need the Shift E for rotate. So the first step is to bring both of these controllers over to one of the sides. Let's just bring it over here. We'll rotate it in Z and start somewhere around there. Let's do a -45, just so it's a round number. And that is our first keyframe. If you don't have this button here in the lower right turned on, this is the auto keyframe toggle button. It won't automatically set keys for you when you move the rig in another key. Let me show you the difference because this is an important distinction. So if I turn this off and rotate it, notice a key wasn't made. But if I undo that and turn this on and then rotate it, it automatically set a keyframe. So I actually prefer to leave that turned on, so it automatically sets keys for me as I move the rig in space and in the timeline. So let's say we want to swing to the other side. So how long does that take? This might take a little bit of trial and error, but I'm going to just imagine that it takes about a second to travel all the way over to the other side. It's a pretty big amount of time. So let's see, it might be too slow, but you know, the speed of it can affect the perception of weight. So if it's a really big, giant wrecking ball, it might take a little longer. If it's a really small, lightweight pendulum, it might swing a little faster. So it's something to experiment with. Let's go to frame 24, and I'm just going to reverse this value. So it's instead of -45, let's do 45. Now it's in the opposite direction. And if we scrub, which this is called scrubbing in the timeline, back and forth, you can see we've got a little swing here. but it's only swinging in one direction. Let's just hit play down here in the timeline. And it just swings there and it stops. Okay, let's press stop and rewind it. Here's a couple shortcuts that I recommend that you memorize when you're animating. If you want to play and pause, just press Alt and V. V is or Alt V is something that will play and pause. If you want to rewind, Alt Shift V will rewind. So those are two really commonly used shortcuts for animating. I want to swing this back after it hits this. I want it to go back to this. So I could copy this frame. Let's just go right click on that and copy and go to frame 48 and paste. There we go. So now we have those two poses for the swing, and it's going back and forth. And I want this to loop over and over again. And so this is something that can be achieved in a lot of different ways. You could copy paste, and just repeat that over and over again. Or we can go into the graph editor and adjust it there so that it loops. So let's go ahead and do that. So I've opened up the graph editor. You can also get this window, Animation Editor's graph editor. That's where that window is located. And I want to set these two controllers to loop infinitely. So first off, let's go to the View menu and make sure Infinity is turned on. If you don't see Infinity turned on, this won't work. And then the next thing we need to do is select the animation control, the animation curves here for Rotate Z, and go up to Curves, the Curves menu here, and go to Pre-Infinity, and we'll just do a cycle, and go to Curves once again and do Post-Infinity cycle. And what that does is it just makes it loop. So if you zoom out, and you can use the same manipulations to zoom in and out as you would in the viewport up here. So Alt middle mouse will pan, Alt right mouse button drag left and right will zoom in and out. Alt Shift right mouse button drag up and down will kind of zoom in the values so you can see the values a little bit better. Alt Shift right mouse button drag left and right will zoom in on the time. So those are some really handy shortcuts. Now if we hit play, Alt V, you can see it just swings back and forth. So earlier we set the preferences to be a linear swing, and I wanted to show you that you can change that tangent so it's not linear and makes it a little bit more smooth by selecting the keys that you've created. We can just drag across all of them and go to tangent, and then we can turn these into a spline or a flat type tangent, and you can see they're much smoother now. Let's hit play and just see how that changed the animation. A lot more realistic. So let's say you want to swing a little bit faster. We can select the keys in the graph editor and move them. Just hold down, just tap the W key to get your move tool, and then holding shift and middle mouse, you can drag it to the left and reduce the amount of time it takes to swing to that keyframe. The other way you can edit keys, I'm just going to undo that. The other way you can move keys around is in the time editor here. We can hold down shift and click and drag across the keys that we want to move, and then move them back. So let's say we want this to be on, let's say frame, like let's put it on frame 16 just to be a round number. And then this one right here, we'll put this on frame 32. So it's equidistant. And let's hit Alt V to play it a little faster now. Nice. Now, one thing that I notice about this is that there's really no like kind of natural offset occurring on that lower half. So another thing we can do to kind of give it a more believable, relaxed swing, as though this child section is swinging a little bit further after this one finishes, is we can offset the keys. So I'm going to select just that one, just that controller there, and then select these keys. And let's have it happen a little bit delayed after this one. That just means we're going to have to tap W again, once again, shift middle mouse, and just drag the keys over, maybe just by a couple frames to start, and let's see how that changes the the vibe, the feeling of the animation. Alt-Shift-V to rewind, and Alt-V to play. And you can see it's much more loose feeling now. So experiment with those things and report back the results. I hope this was helpful.